Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and its NATO proxy forces. Now, various situation developing. Obviously, the Biden figurehead, the figurehead El Presidente of the United States has deemed it okay for NATO and the Ukrainian military to start to use long-range Western precision-guided weapon systems deep inside the Russian Federation. They have essentially allowed the Ukrainians and NATO to attack Moscow with, in some cases, what could be a nuclear-capable weapon system. Now, obviously, are we going to see a mushroom cloud over Moscow? Probably not. But these weapon systems that are going to be deployed against Russian targets have a nuclear capability. So we're seeing the Russians start to prepare for the event of escalation. Now, what's happening? Well, we are starting to see the Russians deploy mobile nuclear bomb shelters. The Russians are conducting operations in which they are setting up these mobile nuclear bomb shelters for its populace and military personnel. That is happening as we speak. What does that mean? Well, it means that the Russians are actively preparing its populace for the possible event of a nuclear exchange or a conventional military exchange between the Russian Federation and Western forces. Additionally, within the past 24 hours, we have seen the Ukrainians launch 6 ATACMS ballistic missiles towards Russian targets inside the Russian Federation. The reports indicate that the Russians were able to shoot down 5 out of 6 of these missiles, with the possibility of one missile hitting or striking near a Russian target in the Bryansk region, this area here, just to the north of the Ukraine, just to the east of Belarus. Now, it's going to be difficult for the Ukrainians to effectively hit targets, especially if they decide to hit targets deep inside the Russian Federation, such as targets around Moscow with the ATACMS. The Russians have one of the most robust air defense zones in and around Moscow. So what will NATO do if it detects a target that it absolutely has to strike and wants to try and make an example of? Well, it's probably not going to use storm shadows. It's probably not going to use ATACMS. Now, there's been discussions about the Ukrainians that have developed their own ballistic missile systems that could possibly reach Moscow, but they're probably not going to use those as well. Again, due to the robust air defense network that the Russians have. So what will the West use in a statement attack against Moscow? This is the weapon here that will be used. It's the JASSM. Now, I would say it's fairly likely that, given the Biden figurehead announcing that the Ukrainians can now strike targets deep inside the Russian Federation, that is going to provide plausible deniability to the United States, to the U.S. military, to the Central Intelligence Agency, to possibly use low observable stealth munitions against Russian targets, such as the JASSM. These are the weapon systems that the U.S. would use against a very well-defended target, such as the Russians have in terms of their S-500s and S-400 air defense network that exists around Moscow. Very difficult to hit a target in Moscow with a semi or ballistic missile system unless it is a saturation attack, a massive attack. So that attack that would occur against Moscow would probably involve the weapon system that you're looking at now, in all probability launched from a B-2 stealth bomber, either entering Ukrainian airspace and then launching the munition towards a Russian target. Then the West, the United States, would then have plausible deniability in claiming that it was a Ukrainian missile that struck a Russian target. Look, you have to understand something. You have to get the idea that there was an election in the United States. That election resulted in a devastating defeat for the unitary one-party system. The amount of the population that came out to vote against the unitary one-party state and the figurehead Biden administration was unanimous. It was beyond the margin of correction in which they could falsify the election. But it happened. So what is the final option to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president? Think about it. There has not been an election in the beacon of democracy, Ukraine, since early 2019, about 6 years. And it's perfectly acceptable in the West to then call the Ukraine the beacon of democracy, even though it lives under martial law and has not had an election in more than half a decade. It's a fact. So if World War III were to start, would there be a change in governance in the United States? Would the Biden figurehead administration, the deep state, the unitary one-party state, declare martial law? Would they declare Donald Trump a Russian asset as World War III commences? This is hypothetical. But again, the so-called beacon of democracy, the beacon of democracy, the borderlands, live under martial law without elections in more than half a decade. And the uninformed urbanites here in the United States that voted for the cackling hyena accept this. They would accept they would accept, in the case of World War III, martial law being instituted in denying the so-called Russian asset taking power. Very, very dangerous time we're in right now. Incredibly dangerous time. And unfortunately, the news, the mainstream media, if that's what you want to call it, the news. I can't believe I said news. I apologize for that. Boy. Yeah. And at the same time, we go over to the deep state map, the deep state map, and we look at what's happening. Ukrainian defenses are collapsing. The Russians are winning. This is causing immense discomfort right now. Think about the hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of billions of dollars that have been spent. There was a reason that money was spent. And there's going to have to be accountability, and there's going to be a response to the loss of all that capital that was designed to do something. So we will continue to keep an eye on things. Again, incredibly dangerous 30 days ahead of us. Probably the most dangerous period in the history of humanity. We'll keep an eye on things. Thanks for joining us. More to come. Have a good day.